Hi everyone, it's Erin from the Provincial Farmhouse. Today I've put together a collection of my top 5 projects using molds for 2024. For my first project, I'm going to be showing you how you can transform a wooden drawer into a French style planter. For my project today, I'm going to be using this wooden drawer that I had in my stash. Ultimately, my vision for this piece is inspired by the French country style urn planters. I'm going to begin by adding some curves on the outside. I'm using just some cheap clay that I had in my stash that I need to use up, and you can see I'm just molding it to the surface. I really want a nice curved edge. If you look up French country style urn planters or just urn planters, you'll see a lot of them have beautiful curved sides, and obviously we're working with just a simple wooden drawer, so I need to add those curves in. So I'm adding some of my Sealy's quickset wood glue. On the end, because that's the end of the drawer, there is a little bit of a difference in levels, so I've just added a little bit more clay there before I add the curved piece that I'm going to attach to the side. Once I'm happy with the level, I'm adding some more of my wood glue and then I'm attaching that curved piece. So I just did this by hand, so it's not going to be perfect at all, but it will definitely achieve the look that I'm going for. So I'm just molding it to the surface. I'm then going to add a little bit more of my clay up the top to soften those edges, and whatever I do on the right hand side there, I'm going to have to do on each of the corners of our planter box. Next, I'm going to add some more of my wood glue to the surface and I'm going to start layering some more clay down. I'm actually going to be covering the entire outside of the box with clay. Now, this is not great quality clay, unfortunately, so I'm definitely expecting a bunch of cracking, but I'm going to be layering more clay over the top that is definitely not going to crack. So as you can see, I've sped up the footage here. I'm adding those curved sides on each of the corners, and then I'm starting to layer on some more of that clay. I wanted to create a raised detail on the front, so I'm just cutting a styrofoam egg that I had in my stash in half, and I'm going to be using this to create the raised element in the center. Because it's in the center, it would be more obvious if it wasn't a more perfect shape. So I'm going to add some of my wood glue to the back of that, put it in the center of my box. I'm then going to add some glue over the top of that, and I'm going to start layering on some clay over the top of that. So I have rolled this out with a rolling pin, and I'm just molding it to the surface. So it's a little bit repetitive, but I think you get the idea. Basically, I'm going to be adding all of the curved details to what is just a plain drawer, a plain box. This is definitely something that you can do, and I definitely recommend that you do find yourself some cheaper sort of clay, because I did go through a lot of this, and so I want to use my cheaper clay that I know is probably going to crack and separate a little bit on my base layer to build the form, and then I can layer my better quality clay over the top of it once this is dry. I only added that curved detail to the front center part. On the back, I'm just laying down a strip of clay. Here you can see I am rolling out some more clay, but this time I am using my Das air dry clay. This is a much better quality clay. I don't find that I get any cracking with this. You can see the base layer, I have a lot of cracks. This is why I said this is the base layer. We're going to go over the top of it. You won't even see those cracks. It's just created the base form that we needed. So I've laid down a generous amount of glue, and now I'm going to start layering over the top of that with my Das air dry clay. I did then speed up the footage of me applying the Das air dry clay layers over the top because it was a little bit time consuming. Now obviously I've gone to a lot of effort to create curves here. If you wanted to keep it just a plain planter box shape, that's fine. Next, I'm going to be using IOD's new veranda stamp. This is the smaller lattice stamp design from that pack. I'm pressing it into my still wet dust air dry clay because I want to create a lattice impression here. And as you can see, it creates a really beautiful effect. I have already done this on a pot in a previous video. So I'm just going to work my way around my planter box. Obviously my clay is still wet. This won't work if your clay is already set and hardened. So I'm just going to keep adding that lovely detail. Next, I'm going to be using Redesign's Salon Parisien Charm Mould. I just love this design. I haven't used it yet. I'm dusting it with cornstarch, and then I'm going to be working my dust air dry clay into this beautiful design. You can see I'm just using my fingers to push that excess clay out. And once I'm happy with that, I'll flex the mold, flip it over, and gravity helps me get my design out. Now I don't mind that I have a couple of bits missing. We're going for a vintage look here, so this is just going to add to that charm. I'm going to add some of my Sealy's Quickset wood glue to the back of my casting, and this is going to go over the top of the raised detail that we added in the center. I did have a little bit of breakage on a couple of the smaller pieces. I'm not worried about that. I'm going to press down, just put those little pieces back into place. I'm then going to be using Redesign's Salon Des Glaces mold, and I'm just going to work the clay into one of the designs. This is a continuing design. You can see they all sort of link together, the top section there, but I'm just going to do a partial casting of the design that I want. And again, I'm flipping it over, and this really is the easiest way to get your castings out. I'm going to add some glue to the back of the casting, and then this is going to be positioned up the top of our ornate detail in the center. I'm then going to go back to the Salon Parisien Charm Mold by Redesign, and I'm actually going to be just using the edge pieces. I've dusted both sides with cornstarch. I'm working my clay into that design and then again flipping it over to get it out. I'm going to add some glue to the back of this, and then this is going to go in the bottom left hand corner. I loved the curves on this. I felt like it really accentuated the curves we created with the clay. I'm going to cast the opposite side, and we're going to add some glue to the back of that, and then that's going to go on the right hand side. They're not exact mirror images, but they're close enough. I'm then going to be using Redesign's Floral Chain Mold. I'm going to dust the design with cornstarch, and I'm going to work my clay into that bottom design. I'm not going to be using the whole thing, but I'm going to cast the entire design and then work out what I want to use. These are quite delicate and can be a little bit tricky, so sometimes using a card or a palette knife along the back of the casting can help you get a clean edge. Once I have my casting out, I'm going to use a palette knife to cut off the excess designs that I don't want, and I'm going to add some glue to the back of them, and then this is actually going to drape on the left hand side from the top design to the bottom left hand design. I then decided to use part of the leftover pieces from the floral chain design mold, and then I did cast a couple of partial pieces of that same casting and glued that underneath to finish the design. So again, not perfect mirror images, but close enough. Back to the Salon Des Glaces mold, and I'm going to cast that same design that we put up the top in the center. And again, you can definitely just use part of your mold. You don't have to use them as is. And once I have pulled my casting out, I did then take a palette knife, and I'm just going to be cutting off the floral design from that because it will not fit where I want it to go. I'm going to remove some of the excess clay there, and then I'm going to be gluing that underneath our raised element from the center. I did end up gently lifting that center design so I could tuck my casting underneath and make it look a little bit tidier. I then took the floral chain mold by Redesign again. I'm just going to do a partial casting there of the top design, and I'm just going to be doing 2 of those, and they're going to sit left and right up the top. Next, I'm going to do some more partial castings from the Salon Des Glaces mold, and I am going to be doing left and right castings of those again, and I'm just working my clay into part of the design, and then again, once I'm happy with that, I will flip it over. This particular part of the casting has some beautiful swells and scrolls, and I thought it would be perfect sitting on the sides of our planter. As you can see, I'm positioning it up the top and sort of wrapping it around the side of the planter and then working it in so that it fits with the other castings that are already there. So I'm going to cast the opposite side of that design so it's like a mirror image, and that will go on the top right hand side. On the sides of the planter, I cast the exact same molds for the corners. That is the Parisien charm design, and I also cast one of the Salon Des Glaces molds as well to sit up the top. So this is just really complementing the front as well and tying them all together. So I did that on the other side. On the back, you can see that I am just working that veranda stamp into the still damp clay. I want it to match the front, and I'm also adding some of the Parisien charm molds on the back as well, but I still kept it pretty simple here. I then took IOD's Trimmings 1 mold. I'm going to dust the top design with some cornstarch, and I'm rolling my clay up and then really working it into the design. This isn't a very long design, so I did have to repeat this a few times, but it is very detailed, and I think it ties in well with the Redesign molds that we've been using. Before I added up the top though, I decided that I would add some glue, and I would add a little bit more of my dust air dry clay just to build that up a little bit, help it tie in with the front and sides of the planter. And then once I'm happy with the levels of that, I will add some more glue and glue down the IOD Trimmings mold. So I did have to cast quite a few of these, but these are continuing patterns, so they do tie together nicely and blend quite seamlessly together. To get a mitered corner on the corners of our planter box, I'm just laying one casting over the other, cutting it on an angle, and then removing the excess. And I repeated the same process around the entire outside. Next, I want to create some feet. So I have these little doorknobs in my stash. I'm going to add some of my Celia's Quickset wood glue around them, and then I'm going to be packing some clay into the divot, into that interior curve, so that we can fill it out a little bit. So I'm adding that clay around the edge, really trying to smooth it out and have it be a little bit more seamless. And then once I'm happy with that, I'm going to use some Gorilla Super Glue and also some hot glue. So the super glue will keep it permanently there. The hot glue is going to hold it there straight away. And I'm adding a little bit of pressure there, and then I did put something underneath it to sort of prop it up. I'm then going to take the Salon Des Glaces mold again, and I did do a partial casting of the scroll designs, and I'm going to position that down the bottom. And so I've got some of it glued to the top part of the planter box there, and also some that comes down and meets with the handle, if that makes sense, so sort of like wrapping around it. I did then use a palette knife to cut off the excess. I did then do a partial casting of part of that same mold so that I could have it sort of wrap around a little bit further. I did that on the left and right hand sides as well. It was a little bit tricky to film, but hopefully you get the idea. And of course I repeated this 4 times for each of the feet. I let my castings dry for 24 hours, and the next day this is how it's looking. I'm loving how this looks. It's a really great base. I'm going to use Paint Couture's Peace Mineral Paint, and I'm also using a size 16 Eco brush, and I'm going to be just really working that paint into all of those beautiful castings. I'm using a pointed, or rather tapered, tip brush, and this paint is such a beautiful, almost French linen type color, and it just really goes perfectly, I think, with the look that we're trying to create. So I'm going to continue adding it to the entire planter box, inside, outside, and on the bottom. And this has a built-in sealer, so I'm not going to have to add anything else over the top of this. And I did only do 1 coat because I didn't really think it mattered too much if I didn't get full coverage. We are going for an older, chippier look. If I inspire you to try any of these Paint Couture products or the Eco Brush, I would really appreciate it if you would use my affiliate link. I will put it in the description and on the screen. I just get a little thank you from Paint Couture in return. I also added the Peace Mineral paint to the inside of the planter box, and for the inside section I did do 2 coats. Once my paint was completely dry, I took out Paint Couture's Bronze Luxe Metallic, and I'm going to be applying it to the details that we added, the beautiful castings, and I'm just using an artist brush to dab and stipple that beautiful metallic on. I want this to be reminiscent of gilding. I'm not going for full coverage here because I do want it to look like it's worn away. And I'm also doing this before our next step because I know that when I come in and wipe back some of the next product that we're going to layer over the top of it, it will fade away even more and give it more of an authentically aged look. Now obviously, if bronze isn't for you at this point, you could come in perhaps with Paint Couture's Antique Gold, maybe the Gold Mine, or maybe you want to come in with the Copper Luxe Metallic. It will just be up to you and what your style is. Just a reminder too that these luxe metallics are so highly pigmented, but obviously they become more vibrant as they dry. Once the Bronze Luxe Metallic was completely dry, I took out Paint Couture's Van Dyke Brown Glaze, and I'm going to be really working that glaze into all of our castings and also the impressions that we made with the IOD veranda stamp. I'm really working it into those nooks and crannies, but I am going to be working in steps here. I don't want it to soak in too quick, so I'm going to use a wet wipe to pull some of it back. And you will see that I also do come in with a mister at times as well to sort of dilute the glaze. Now obviously the mineral paint does have a built-in sealer, but I also just don't want to let it sit in one spot for too long. I don't want it to be too dark, but I definitely want it to give us that aged appearance. And something that I really love to do is when I'm using a wet wipe, I love to leave the little water droplets that you can sometimes achieve when you are wiping back the glaze with a wet wipe, because often it can look like age spots perhaps. In this case, I felt like it really started to look a little bit like rust spots, which is perfect. That's exactly what I was thinking of, especially when you look up pictures of old cast iron planters. A lot of them do have that rustic age to them. So this glaze is definitely helping me to achieve that look. So I'm going to continue adding that beautiful glaze around the entire outside of our planter. Again, if this isn't for you, maybe it's too grungy, you could leave this step out, or maybe you could come in with a white wash, paint wash perhaps, and really lighten it up. Just depends what look you're after. On the inside portion of the planter box, I ended up just using some of the wet wipes that I'd used to wipe away the excess glaze, and that really gave me enough of an aged look on the inside. And here's a look at our French country planter. I love how this turned out. I really feel that the beautiful molds and stamps and the Paint Couture products work together perfectly to create this vintage inspired piece. Let me know what you think of this in the comments. If you enjoyed today's video, I would really appreciate it if you would hit that like button, comment, and share it out. For project 2, I'm going to show you how you can create a cameo style wall art piece using molds. For my next project, I'm going to be using this wood blank that I thrifted for $2, and I am going to be using IOD's new Persephone mold. Now, this is a new design. It's a lot thicker, and I am going to dust it with cornstarch. You can see it's a lot deeper as well. And then I'm going to start working my air dry clay into the design. Now, you want to make sure that you have enough in there so that the design doesn't sort of collapse in on itself. So definitely make sure that you are going up to that outside rim. Once I'm finished pressing that clay in and making sure it's nice and compact, I'm going to flex the mold and then flip it over and then start to peel that mold back to let my casting release. This gorgeous design is going to be the centerpiece of my project. I'm then going to take out IOD's new Felicite mold. This is, again, an absolute favorite. These are a lot thicker. It has some wonderful, deep, detailed floral designs that we're going to be using today. I'm going to dust it with cornstarch. Again, this just really helps your clay to be released a lot easier. And then I'm going to start working my air dry clay into the floral that I want to use first. And then I'm going to start pushing that clay out. And again, these are a lot thicker, so the molds are going to be a lot taller on your surface. There's going to be more depth to them. And this one I'm going to position underneath my Persephone casting, and I'm just going to continue to cast the florals from the Felicite mold until I am happy with how it's looking. Ultimately, I want it to have a floral frame around the outside and also some lovely florals to go underneath the Persephone mold. This one here is a bit of a longer design, and so it is going to be perfect for creating a frame around the outside of my project. I'm going to be casting a few of these to make up the border of my project. So I'm just going to continue to cast those beautiful florals until I have enough for the section underneath the Persephone mold and until I have enough for around the border. And then I am going to be using some wood glue to adhere all of my pieces in place. Again, I am doing this while my clay is still wet so that I can bend and manipulate them to suit my project. When I was creating this piece, I definitely took inspiration from some of the cameo designs that I've seen, and I really feel like these molds just work perfectly together. If you are someone who doesn't like cracks, you can go in with a wet wipe like I am now and perhaps a water mister, and you can smooth out some of the fine lines and cracks that you are seeing if that bothers you. I wasn't too careful about this because I actually like the aged look that this gives. I let my castings dry overnight, and the next day I came in with Paint Couture's Duck Egg chalk paint. This is a beautiful light blue, and I am just going to be painting the wooden background that you can see behind my castings. I'm not too worried about going up onto the castings that we've glued down because I will be painting over those, and I'm also going to be adding that paint around the exterior sections that you can see behind the castings as well. I ended up doing 2 coats of this colour to get the coverage that I wanted. Once the duck egg was completely dry, I took out Paint Couture's Simply White chalk paint, and I'm going to be going over the top of all of the castings. Now, I had to switch between a larger brush and then a smaller brush so that I could get into all of the delicate details and tidy up the areas where I had gotten some of that duck egg blue. Again, very inspired by cameos, and I was seeing a lot of blue and white combinations, and I just really loved the simplicity of that sort of a look. So I'm just going to continue to work my way around the project, going over the top, and I only ended up doing 1 coat. Next, I took out Paint Couture's Oyster Pearl Luxe Metallic, and I started adding it over the top of the Persephone mold first. Now, I wanted to bring some shine, a little bit more elegance to this piece instead of it just having a flat white. But as I was doing this, I decided that I really wanted to highlight more of the details before I went in with the Oyster Pearl anywhere else. So I took out Paint Couture's Weathered Wood Antiquing Glaze, and I'm going to go around the project and add it over the top of the castings. Now, I'm wiping back back a lot. I don't want the weathered wood to really tone the duck egg that we put down, but again, I want it to sit into those lower points, into those details, to highlight the details in these pieces. They are just so gorgeous, and I really wanted to have them be the star of the show. So I'm going to go over the top of the oyster pearl that we added. It is dry, and I'm adding some of that weathered wood. I'll then wipe it back, and you will see how much of a difference that has made. And I'm then going to go back in with the oyster pearl over the top of all of the white sections to bring back more of that bright white, tone down the weathered wood, but still have it sitting down in the details so that you can see all of the features that these castings have. And here's our finished Cameo Inspired wall art. IOD's Persephone and Felicite molds are just so beautiful. I can see myself using these a lot in the future. Let me know what you think of this in the comments. For project 3, I'm going to show you how to transform a terracotta pot using molds into a French style topiary. For today's project, I'm using a pot and saucer that I got from IKEA. I've got the name there for you in case you want to grab this yourself. I picked this up on a recent trip there. I'll link that video up the top right hand corner. I'm then going to be using IOD's Swags mold, particularly the design with the little bows and the florals, and I'm just going to work my Das air dry clay into that design, and using my thumbs I'm going to push that excess clay out. I'm then going to flex the mold and carefully start pulling the design out. I'm actually going to be adapting these molds, cutting them, changing them a little bit to suit the design I'm trying to achieve. So you can see here, I'm just casting the center element from this particular design, and I'm then going to cut off the bow on the left-hand side there because I want there to be 2 draping swag designs before each bow. So I'm just sort of trying to spread that out. You can see here what I'm sort of trying to achieve. I'm also going to be casting just the top bow section. I want that to sit in the center part where the 2 swags meet. I'm going to be using some Sealy's quickset wood glue on the back of each of my castings to stick to my pot. Once I have my main design down, I'm going to take that smaller bow casting that we made, and that's going to sit in the center where those 2 swags meet. So now you're really starting to get an idea of what I am trying to achieve here. And I'm just going to continue to repeat that pattern around the pot until I am back around to the other side. You can see here that once I got back around to where I started, that I was only able to do 1 swag design, but that's okay, that will just sit in the back section. I want my pot to have more of an aged, textured look, so I'm going to take some of Paint Couture's embossing medium, and using a palette knife, I'm going to start spreading it around the pot, and it will create ridges and an uneven surface, so it will definitely give this pot more of a worn, handmade look. If I inspire you to try any of these Paint Couture products from today's video, I would really appreciate it if you would use my affiliate link. I will put the link in the description and on the screen. I just get a little thank you from Paint Couture in return. Once I'm finished adding the embossing medium to the outside, I'm going to start adding it to the lip around the top of the pot. And I actually did switch to just using my finger to pull that medium around the top of the pot. And then after I'd finished doing that, I pulled it sort of on the inside a little bit, because at this stage I just thought I was doing a pot. My project did evolve a little bit later, as you will see. And then I'm also repeating the same steps on the little dish that sits underneath the pot. Once I finished adding the embossing medium, I let my project dry overnight. The next day I came in with Dixie Belle's Chocolate Chalk Mineral Paint. I'm going to be painting the entire pot with this color. We are again thinking about layers here because we're going for a vintage look. So I'm thinking that I want this to be my base layer that's going to peek through some of the other layers that we're going to put on there. So I'm brushing it on, but then you see I do switch to creating a more raised look by dabbing and stippling that paint on. You could also add maybe some of Dixie Belle's Sea Spray to this, or maybe some baking soda if you wanted to add even more texture, but just doing this dabbing and stippling motion is definitely achieving the look that I want. When the chocolate chalk mineral paint was completely dry, I came in with Paint Couture's Extreme Guard in Satin, and I am going to seal that paint in. We're actually going to be using milk paint, so I want there to be a little bit of a resist so that when I apply the milk paint, I get some of that lovely crackle. Once my clear coat was dry, I took Fusion's milk paint in the color Oyster Bar. I'm going to measure out a capful of my milk paint powder, and then I'm going to measure out an equal amount of water to go with it. I'm then going to stir it really well with my brush until all of that powder is dissolved. Next, I'm going to start applying our Oyster Bar milk paint over the top of our pot, and I am working that paint around. It's going to take 2 coats to get the look that I want, but I'm going to work my way around that pot. I don't mind if my brush skips over some of that lovely texture, and of course what I'm going to do is once I have my outside of my pot completely covered, I am then going to be coming in with a heat gun to speed up that drying process, create a bit more texture and that lovely crackle. I'm then coming in with my heat gun and I'm rotating that pot around so that I am first drying that paint evenly, and then next you will see that we are starting to get some wonderful crackle happening. And as I said, I am going to do 2 coats of this to get more of an opaque finish. Once I'm finished painting the inside of the pot and the little dish, I will also be painting the bottom of each of these. So this is how our pot is looking so far. We've got some wonderful texture. Our milk paint is looking great with that crackle. And next I am going to take a wet wipe and I am going to go over the top of the details of our beautiful castings and bring back some of that chocolate underneath. Remember, we have sealed that chocolate, so we're not going to reactivate that, but milk paint can be reactivated with water. This is a look I've done many times before, but it is definitely one of my favorite techniques to get an authentically aged and chippy look. I'm also grabbing my mister sometimes to mist that paint to help pull back some of that paint and show that lovely chocolate underneath. So definitely think about layers if you are looking for a vintage weathered look. Next, I'm going to take some of Paint Couture's Bronze Luxe Metallic. I'm going to get a little bit on my finger and I'm going to go over the top of the beautiful castings that we added. I want this to look like faded gilding, so I'm not going in too heavy. I'm skipping certain sections and I just want a hint of that beautiful color. So like I said, it will look like faded gilding. To make this look more like it has sat in a garden for years, I'm going to take Green Glaze by Paint Couture and I am going to start adding that to my pot. So you can see I'm adding it with a brush and then I'm using a wet wipe to pat back the excess. So this will be something that you will do to your liking depending on how dark you want it to be. I tried to think of where the moss would appear naturally over time, so definitely around the bottom and in amongst some crevices and things. things where that moisture would build up. So I'm just going to continue working my way around the pot, adding it here and there. I don't want to go too crazy with this, but I do want this to look like a weathered pot that has been in a garden for a very long time. After adding it to the outside of the pot, I'm of course going to go in and add it around the edge of the pot and the little dish as well. Next, I'm going to take Dixie Belle's Clear Best Stang Wax and I'm going to seal my entire piece, including that dish. Milk paint needs to be sealed with a wax or a hemp oil so that you don't accidentally reactivate it. And then once I have the amount of wax on there that I want, I'm going to take a paper towel and I'm going to buff back the excess. So it was at this point that I thought that I wanted to add something else. You could definitely just leave it here. You'd have yourself a lovely, nice French style pot. But I wanted to add something on top. I wanted this to be a complete decor piece so that I didn't have to put any flowers or greenery in it. So I decided that I was going to make my own topiary to sit in the top of the pot. To do this, I'm going to be using IOD's Juliette mold. I'm first dusting it with cornstarch. On the left-hand side there, you can see that I have a foam dome. I cut that up from a previous craft project. We're going to be using that as our base. I'm then going to take my DAS air dry clay, and you can see I'm sort of pulling it out in a flatter shape. The Juliette mold is a very large continuous mold. You don't necessarily have to use it like that. A bit later, you'll see that I do break it up into pieces and use bits and pieces of it. But to start off with, I did want to cast the entire thing because we do have a little bit of surface area to cover. So you can see I'm just piecing my clay together, really working it in there, using my thumbs against the micro rim to try and get a smooth edge. And you can see here, once I have it all cast together, that it is quite a large design. So it does take a little bit of time to really get that all filled. You could use resin as well if you wanted. So once I have all of that filled, I'm going to go around and start flexing the edges to help it release from the mold itself. And then once I've done that, I did decide to actually flip it over the top of the foam dome itself so that I got a better idea of how it was going to cover. So I'm just going to carefully pull the design out. Gravity's helping me a little bit here. I am going to get a bit of breakage, but that's okay because we're going to actually be piecing some of the design together anyway. But here you can see how it's going to progress. So I'm going to cover the entire dome with these beautiful roses. I then took the roses off the dome shape and now I'm adding my Sealy's wood glue to the back of the entire thing. I'm going to use my finger to spread that glue around. You definitely want to be generous here to make sure that your castings are going to stay in place. And then I just took certain sections of the Juliette mold and started positioning it on there because I know I'm going to have to piece it together in a slightly different arrangement to get the whole piece covered. So you can see I'm just sort of working with the different pieces that I have there. And again, it doesn't have to be perfect. You can use bits and pieces of this mold. There are so many lovely different sizes of roses and leaves. Just have a play until you are happy with how it looks. Once I have the entire dome covered, this is how it's looking so far. I'm going to add some hot glue around the rim of my pot so that I can secure that topiary design in place. To make the two pieces look a bit more seamless, I'm going to come in with some more pieces of clay and glue those in place in the underside where the pot meets the dome. I then let my clay dry overnight. So this is how our project is looking so far. I am loving the addition of that topiary. I'm then going to come in and add some more of that chocolate chalk mineral paint, just like we did with the pot. I'm going to go over the top of the entire topiary and of course the underside where it meets the pot as well. I just had to be a little bit more careful not to get any paint on our pot below because I do like how that looks and I don't really want to change it. Once that's dry, just like with our pot, I'm going to add some of that oyster bar milk paint and I'm going to go over the top of the entire topiary and obviously down the bottom with that paint. I did have to have a wet wipe handy because we did get a few drips going down on the pot, but because we have sealed that with wax, it was pretty easy to wipe back any of the spilt milk paint. Just like with the pot, I am going to be doing 2 coats and drying each of them in between with a heat gun to get some of that wonderful texture and crackle. When my 2 coats of milk paint are dry, I'm going to take a wet wipe and I'm going to go over the top of the Juliette mold details and I'm going to wipe back some of that milk paint to bring some of that chocolate through, and this is really starting to look like aged stone. I'm really loving how this looks. It definitely has a vintage feel, so I'm just going to continue to make my way around that topiary until I have distressed it. I'm then going to be using some of Paint Couture's Ballet Slipper Luxe Metallic Paint and I'm just going to be putting it on top of the roses designs, and then I'm going to take a wet wipe and dab back some of the excess. I really want this to look like paint that has faded over time from being outside, but I do still want a little bit of a subtle shine. Once I'm finished adding that ballet slipper to each of the roses, I am going to let it dry and then come in with some more of that oyster bar. I'm going to layer that over the top so that, again, it just adds to that faded feel. And then I did grab a wet wipe again to pull that chocolate underneath back through, again to make it look vintage and chippy. I then took some of Paint Couture's Verde Green Antiquing Glaze, and just like we did on the pot, I'm going to add that in certain spots where I think that moss would naturally occur. And you can see I am wiping back some of that excess. To seal the top, I'm going to grab my Best Dang wax again. I'm applying it with a brush and then wiping back the excess with a paper towel. I want this to look like it's come out of a garden, so I'm going to take some of Dixie Belle's Dixie Dirt in charcoal and I'm going to start applying it in places where I think dirt would accumulate, and then I do come back and wipe back some of that with a paper towel. If you're going to try this, this will be to your liking how much you add. So I'm adding it into quite a few of the crevices, but then I'm also going over the top of some of the details like the leaves, for example, and then pulling that back. It's actually highlighting some of the details of those castings. It's really quite a nice effect. After finishing with the topiary section, I'm of course going to add some to our little base. And here's our finished French country pot with topiary. I'm really happy with how this turned out. I definitely think it looks like it's come out of a French country garden, perhaps a stone statue that has been there for years. Let me know what you think of this in the comments. For project 4, I'm going to show you how you can transform thrifted candlesticks into beautiful home decor using molds. I thrifted these candlesticks quite some time ago, so they've been sitting in my stash just waiting for the right inspiration and products to use on them. I'm going for a French, almost Gustavian finish on these, and I'm going to be using Redesign molds. The first mold I'm using is Redesign Salon Des Glaces mold. This is from one of their recent releases. I'm going to dust 2 of the designs with cornstarch, and then I'm going to start working my air dry clay into my molds there. The cornstarch is going to make it a lot easier to be able to get my castings out. So you can see I'm just pushing out that excess clay, and then when I'm happy with that, I will flex the mold and then flip it over, and gravity is going to help me get my castings out. I envisioned that this piece would go down the bottom and that I would then cast the mirror image design that's on that same mold that will go opposite on the candlestick. Once I have my other casting ready, I am adding Sealy's Quickset wood glue to the back of my clay castings, and I'm going to start adding them to the candle base. Clay is wonderful to work with because you are able to bend it and manipulate it in any way that you want, and dust air dry clay I find doesn't have any cracking as it dries, so it's definitely a great product to work with. So I'm just going to manipulate those castings until they're sitting the way that I want, and then you can see I've already cast 2 more of each of those, and I'm going to be adding those to the opposite side of the candlestick. Once I have those secured in place, I took out Redesign's Sorrento Laurels mold. I'm dusting the design there on the left with cornstarch and then rolling my air dry clay out, and then I'm going to start working it into the design. Up the top there, you'll notice that there are quite a few intricate sections, and I do get a little bit of breakage sometimes when I'm doing this, but it is very easy to glue those pieces back together, so it's not something that I'm too worried about. Once I have that mold filled, I'm going to flex the design, and then just like before, I'm going to turn it over, and the gravity is going to help the mold release. I'm then going to flip my casting over and add some wood glue to the back. You can see that I do already have a little bit of breakage happening, but as I said, that's okay. We can glue these things back into place. I'm going to position my casting on the center part of the candlestick. I'm envisioning this particular section to be the front part. So as you can see, I'm just repositioning some of the pieces that broke off and making sure that I have them glued in place. I'm then going to take out Redesign Salon Des Glaces mold again, and I am going to do a partial casting. You can see where I've dusted my mold with cornstarch. That's the area that I'm going to work my clay into. Once I have my casting out of the mold, I'm going to add some glue directly to the surface of the candlestick. This is a rounded section here, so it is a lot easier for me to add glue to the surface. I'm going to position that partial casting from the Salon Des Glaces mold, and you can see that I'm really bending this. I'm really manipulating the way that it looks until I'm happy with it. I did have a little bit of breakage again, but I was able to glue that back in place. Next, I'm going to take out that Sorrento Laurels mold again, and I'm just going to cast the little flower there. I just want that detail, and I'm going to glue that on top of the partial casting we did of the Salon Des Glaces mold. Next, I'm going to be using a different part of the Sorrento Laurels mold. I'm just dusting that small section there with cornstarch, and then I'm going to do a partial casting. I will then add some glue to the back, and I'm going to position this underneath the section that we just glued on. Next, I'm going to do the exact same partial casting that I did on the Salon Des Glaces mold, and just repeating those same steps, working the clay into the areas. And I am going to be adding this to the opposite side where we already have this casting, if that makes sense. And I am going to be using my Sealy's Quickset wood glue. Again, I'm adding that to the rounded surface of the candlestick as opposed to the mold itself. And then I'm going to position my casting on there. Now, I definitely adjusted this one quite a bit because it's not going to fit, so I did end up pulling off, as you can see on the left hand side there are some pieces that I've already pulled off. It's a little bit shorter, but I'm going to save those and use them in another spot. Before that though, I'm going to cast that little flower like we did on the opposite side, and I'm going to glue that in the same place. I then took the two little pieces that I pulled off my casting, and I'm going to glue those in between each of the longer Sorrento Laurel designs that we added to the front section. As you can see there, I'm just pressing down and making sure that's secure. As I was working on my design, I definitely had to keep in mind that I had to have the opposite side similar so that it was a balanced design. Next, I'm going to take out Redesign's floral chain mold. I'm going to do a partial casting of the design on the left there. And again, this is quite a fiddly piece. You could use a plastic card to help get a smooth edge if you're having any trouble. And once I have taken that out, I'm going to add some glue to the back of it, and this particular design is going to go up the top of our candlestick. I then did another partial casting. This time I had 3 of the loops, and I am going to be adding that to the other side of the top of the candlestick to finish off that design. Obviously, whatever I'm doing on this candlestick, I am going to be doing on the other one that matches this, because I do want 2 matching candlesticks. Once I'd finished gluing down all my castings, I did let these dry overnight. As I mentioned at the beginning, I'm going for quite an old world look, so I need to add some age. I'm going to take out Paint Couture's embossing medium. I'm going to take some of that out and put it in a plastic container. I'm then going to take out Paint Couture's crust medium, and I'm going to put the same equal amount of product in that container. And then I used Paint Couture's Van Dyke Brown Glaze to tint it. This is going to help create texture on our candlesticks. As I said, they have been drying overnight, so they are set really well. I don't have to worry about them breaking off. Once I have my mixture ready, I'm going to start applying it over the entire candlestick, and you can see I am dabbing and stippling that product on over everything. I want this to look aged and weathered, and like perhaps it's had many layers of paint over the years, and this texture is definitely going to help achieve this. Now, I did tint it because at this stage I was wondering if maybe I was going to be doing some wiping back to reveal that color underneath. So I did that just as a sort of precaution in case I went down that road. Once I'd finished adding the medium to both my candlesticks and they were completely dry, I took out Paint Couture's Opal Green Chalk Paint. This is a beautiful greeny blue tone. I have not used this before, so I was very excited to be using it on this project. I definitely wanted to try some different things in today's video. So I'm going to add that beautiful opal green to the entire candlestick, and I'm doing a dabbing and stippling motion, really working it into all of the details of those beautiful castings that we added. But doing this motion is also obviously going to add to that texture. I did 1 full coat on each of the candlesticks, and then I went back and did touch up in a few little areas that I had missed. When the opal green was completely dry, I then took out Paint Couture's Cozy Beige Chalk Paint, and I'm going to be going over the top of each of our castings, and I am dabbing that paint on. I'm not going for full coverage here. I don't mind if it looks like that paint has worn away over time. We're going to be doing some layering over the top, so we're not going for perfection. So I'm going to continue adding that lovely Cozy Beige over all of the details, and I did only do 1 coat of this particular color. As I was working on these candlesticks, I found it really interesting that at each of the different steps, I actually quite liked how it looked. So if any point during this video you feel that you would like it at that point and you don't like perhaps what I go on and add to it, each of these looks really can stand on their own. That's what I really liked about this process, is I could see the different color combinations and see what worked and what didn't. But I actually really like this combination of that greeny blue with the cozy beige, that two-toned look. I feel like it definitely looks quite French and really effective, actually, really quite provincial looking. So here's how it's looking at this stage. As I said, you could probably leave it here. This is quite a lovely, fun look as is, but I like an older world look, so I'm going to take out Paint Couture's Van Dyke Brown Glaze and I'm going to go over the top of the entire candlestick. At this point, I was thinking that perhaps I wanted those castings to look a little bit more like a wood tone, and this is definitely something that Van Dyke Brown Glaze can achieve. So I'm going to add it over the top of each of the castings and all over the paint, and then I will be pulling back some of that product. I don't have a sealer down because I'm working on such a small surface area. I'm not worried about it sinking in before I have an opportunity to wipe it back. Once I had most of the top section covered in the glaze, I grabbed a wet wipe and you can see I am dabbing and pulling off that excess glaze, but allowing it to really sit down into the details and also catch on that texture that we created in the other areas. If I feel that the glaze is a little bit too heavy in some areas, I am able to use my mister. I can mist that product because it's water-based, and I can help that glaze move a little bit better. So I'm going to continue to add that glaze on the rest of the candlestick, really working it into all of the details. As I said before, there were different stages while doing this project where I thought I actually quite like how it looks right now. So this is that point. I really quite liked how it looked with the glaze over the top of the castings, and it also deepened that opal green color. So you could definitely leave it here if perhaps this was a look that you liked. When the glaze was dry, I took out Paint Couture's Bronze Luxe Metallic, and I'm going to go over the top of all of the areas that we added that cozy beige and also obviously the glaze, and I'm going to start adding that beautiful metallic. Now, I'm not going for full coverage here. I want this to look like old gilding that's worn away over time, so I don't need it to be perfect. So I am going to go around and add that beautiful bronze to all of those castings. And remember, with these metallics, they do get brighter and more vibrant once they are dry. I went with bronze for this, but if this isn't to your style, you could perhaps come in with a silver luxe metallic by Paint Couture, a copper. Maybe you're a bit more of a bright gold person. Gold mine might be a better option for you. I just really love bronze. To me, it's a very classic look. If I inspire you to try any of these Paint Couture products, I would really appreciate it if you would use my affiliate link. I will put it in the description and on the screen. I just get a little thank you from Paint Couture in return. Once I finished adding the bronze to my castings, I then decided to add it to the rounded raised details that you can see in the section there that I'm painting. They kind of get lost a little bit once I've got the paint and the glaze on there, so I'm really going to highlight those, and also another two of the raised borders around the top sections. Again, you could leave the project at this stage. I actually felt this looked really great. I was definitely happy with it, but it didn't look as old world and weathered as I wanted. So I did decide that once this bronze was completely dry, that I would take out Paint Couture's buttercream chalk paint, and I added some to a plastic container and watered it down to create a paint wash. And then I started adding it over the top of my candlestick. I brushed the mixture on, and then I took out my mister and really hit it with that water. And you can see I'm almost directing it down with the way that I'm directing the water down, and I'm letting it trickle down, dribble down into all of the details. I don't want this to be opaque. I want there to be hints of this, almost like a whitewash. I kept adding water and watering it down, and then I took out a paper towel and started dabbing back that paint wash. So I'm really wanting it to sit into the details. I want it to catch some of the texture. I want it to tone the paint just a little, and this will be something that you will do to your liking. You could even leave this step out if you felt like it was a little bit too much, or you could use a wax instead if this was perhaps a little bit too intense. So I'm going to continue to add the paint wash mixture in those different areas. I then use my mister to help it move and water it down further, and then I do come in with a wet wipe and a paper towel to dab back the excess to my liking. Once I'd repeated the same process on the other candlestick, I did decide to take out my bronze luxe metallic, and I'm going over the top of my dry paint there. I just want to bring out that luster again. It did get quite hidden by the paint, which is fine, and you could definitely leave this step out, but I just wanted a little bit more shine, just a bit more. So I'm going to go around and add a little bit more of that bronze over the top of the details. And here are our finished ornate candlesticks. I love how these turned out. Those Redesign molds are absolutely gorgeous, and I really feel like that bronze luxe metallic brought this piece to life. Let me know what you think of this in the comments. For our final project, number 5, I'm going to show you how you can use molds to create a bird bath style pot. I'm going to be using this terracotta pot that I picked up from a hardware store in Australia called Bunnings. This is going to be my base. I'm also going to be using IOD's Faux Bois mold, specifically the molds that look like wood branches with leaves. I'm going to be dusting the 2 designs with cornstarch. That's going to help my clay to release, and I am going to be using Das air dry clay. To create my castings, I'm first rolling the clay between my hands and then pressing it into the long design. So you can see that I'm pressing it in and then pushing the excess out. And the micro rim that comes with IOD molds is really helpful for getting a nice clean line. I'm starting with this thicker branch design because on the base of the pot there is a sort of indent. It goes in, and birds' nests usually have a much smoother transition, so using this larger mold down the bottom is going to help soften the harsh edges and make it a more gradual change in width. I'm applying my Sealy's Quickset wood glue to the back of my castings, and now I'm going to start attaching it to the terracotta pot. You can see I have flipped it upside down. This is just going to be the easiest way to work with the castings at this point, and I'm just starting to add those castings. You can see that they actually connect together. They're designed to be interconnecting and to look like a continuous pattern. So I'm going to continue adding the castings, wrapping them around the bottom of the terracotta pot. While most of this design is going to have the castings just winding around one on top of the other, I am going to have a few that sort of cross over each other. I tried to think of what a bird's nest looks like, and they don't have obviously even wood pieces. So now I'm going to switch over to the thinner wood design there, and I'm going to continue pushing that excess clay out until I have a nice clean edge. Then I'm going to flex the mold, flip it over, and the casting is going to fall out. I'm going to add some of my quickset wood glue, and now we're starting to layer those molds over the top to create sort of a irregular looking pattern, a bit more of a natural looking design. I'm going to continue layering a few different pieces there, and then I'm going to start adding the smaller pieces above the larger pieces. So just continuing that design up the pot until I have the entire outside covered with these castings. Now I selected a terracotta pot because of the strength of the pot. It's going to support my castings really well, but you could use a metal bowl, you could use a plastic bowl. Just make sure that whatever you're using, you know that it can support all of that clay, because I actually ended up using about 1 kilo of clay, because I'm also going to be adding it to the inside. I really wanted to create a bird's nest that also had the birds. I wanted to create a table centerpiece essentially, and when I saw the faux bois molds and this lovely wood branch style, almost like a trim design, I thought it would be perfect for this. It already has so much lovely texture built into it, a beautiful natural sort of woodland theme, so it really is perfect for this type of craft. Now I did go a little bit bigger with mine because I want it to be a centerpiece, but you could do a smaller scale version of this with some smaller terracotta pots or some smaller bowls. At this point you can see I'm winding that clay up around the top lip of the terracotta pot, and now I'm going to start working the larger branch designs into the inside of the pot. Because I want to be able to see the inside, I envision it, as I said, as a table centerpiece, I need the inside to look finished as well, and it would look a little bit odd if I only had the beautiful faux bois molds on the outside. I have to continue that on the inside to really make this look like a more realistic bird's nest. So I'm just continuing to add those molds in a circular motion around the bottom of that pot until I have it completely covered. As I got closer to the center bottom part of the pot, I switched over to one of the skinnier branch designs so that it would fit a little bit easier, and I am going to cover the hole in the bottom of the pot with just some more clay and glue that in place. I don't need this to be watertight, this is just for the visual of it. Next, I'm going to be taking some little birds that I thrifted. They're an actual pair, so they go perfect together. And I'm going to be using some Gorilla Super Glue on the base of each of these birds, and I'm going to be attaching it to the terracotta pot. You can see I've pulled some of that clay to the side a little bit so that it's a little bit wider, and I'm just positioning the birds on the edge there and holding them in place. The glue does not take long at all to dry. It only took about a minute for each bird to feel solid and in place. So once they are set, I am going to take another piece of that skinnier wood trim mold, and I'm positioning that underneath the bird's feet again to provide a little bit more support and so that it doesn't look like they're sort of hovering in the air. I then switched to IOD's Viridis mold, and I'm going to be casting some of the leaf designs, and I am going to be positioning those underneath our little birds. So I'm just flexing that, pulling that casting out, and then using my wood glue to glue the castings down. So the faux bois mold does have little leaves in the design, however I wanted some other larger leaves to layer over the top. If you don't have access to these molds, this is still definitely a craft that you could give a go. You could layer some clay over the top of your terracotta pots and then just make little lines in the clay with a little butter knife. You could use other leaf molds. Really, this is definitely something that you can try. You don't have to have exactly what I'm using. I'm just showing you how I used these beautiful IOD products to get this look. I let my castings dry overnight, and now I'm coming in with Paint Couture's 2-in-1 primer in grey. I only need to apply this to my little birds because they are ceramic, so they are going to need some help for my paint to be able to stick well. So I'm going to apply that with a chip brush. You can see I'm dabbing and stippling that on. I want to create some texture, and I'm going to be doing one coat, letting that dry, and then coming in with a second coat. Once my 2 coats of primer were completely dry, I moved on to the bird's nest. I'm laying down one base coat of Dixie Belle's chocolate chalk mineral paint. This is just a color that I had left in my stash that I'm trying to work through. I don't like to waste any craft supplies at all, so I'm just trying to use this up. I'm going to apply that to the entire inside and outside of the bird's nest, and I'm also going to be applying it over the top of the little birds. I want this to be a base coat that's peeking through some of the other colors that we're layering, so it almost looks like perhaps rust. Once that was dry, I took out Paint Couture's Queen's Court mineral paint. I'm going to be applying this beautiful blue over the top of the birds only, and I'm applying it in a dabbing motion. You can see I'm allowing that brush to skip certain sections because, again, I want some of that brown paint showing through underneath so that it looks like it's been weathered and worn away over time. So I'm going to be applying 2 coats of this over both of the birds, and this has a built-in top coat as well, which is definitely going to be handy for the rest of this project. Next, I am going to be using Paint Couture's Gloss Extreme Guard top coat. I'm going to be sealing the chocolate chalk paint that we laid down because obviously that's quite a porous paint still, and I'm going to be layering milk paint over the top, and I want to achieve crackle and texture, and it really does achieve a better result if you put that over the top of a sealed surface. Otherwise it just soaks straight in to a porous surface. So I'm just going to apply 1 coat of the gloss. I went with gloss because it is probably the thicker out of satin and gloss, and then I let it dry. Next, I'm coming in with Fusion's Toasted Coconut Milk Paint. This is one of my favorite colors. It's a lovely cream tone. I'm going to measure out 1 capful of the milk paint, put it in a plastic container, and then I'm going to pour out the same amount of water and add it to the powder. I'm then going to mix my milk paint up with a little milk frother, milk stirrer that I have, and this is actually going to really thicken up that milk paint. It definitely gives it a frothy sort of consistency, and I'm going to be applying 1 coat to start off with. Now, because I mixed it the way I did, it is a little bit more transparent. I probably could have mixed it without that, but I really love the texture that doing this brings. And I'm going to be applying 1 coat first, and then we will come in with a second coat, which you will see definitely fills everything in really nicely. So I'm moving on to the outside, and I'm really loving how this is catching all of the details of those beautiful IOD molds. I went with milk paint because it has amazing texture. We're going to get that wonderful crackle. However, if you don't have this, you could go with a white paint wash instead of a white water-based paint. Here I am coming in with the second coat of the milk paint. You can see it's starting to fill everything in really nicely, and I am going to be speeding up the drying process on the second coat because that is when you achieve that texture. That's when you can bring about that cracking, when you speed up that drying process. I do, however, also want to apply the extra layer around the outside first before I start speeding up the drying process. And I am also going to be adding it to the birds themselves because, again, I want these to look old and weathered and chipped, so I want it to look like there's been lots of layers of paint over the years. So I'm applying it on pretty heavy, then grabbing my hairdryer. I've got it on the hottest heat setting, and I'm going to move it around until I have that milk paint dried and until I can see some of that beautiful crackle appearing. Once the milk paint was completely dry, I then took out a wet wipe and I'm going to start doing some wet distressing. That's the beauty of milk paint, is you can reactivate that paint and you can do wet distressing a lot less messy than doing sanding with sandpaper. So you can see I'm really pulling back that paint on the details of that faux bois mold, and I'm also then going over the top of our sweet little birds to pull back some of that, show some of the chocolate chalk paint underneath, and also of course that Queen's Court mineral paint. Next, I wanted to add some color to the leaves, so I'm going to use Vintage Moss Mineral Paint by Paint Couture. I'm applying it over the top of the leaves that the little birds are sitting on, and also a couple behind them as well. I'm doing this in a messy way because we are not going for perfect here. Once I have finished applying that green, I am then also going to take out a wet wipe and I will be pulling back some of that paint again to give it a chippy, weathered look. It still wasn't looking quite as aged as I wanted, so I went over with a very light layer of the toasted coconut milk paint. I don't have any extra paint on my brush, it's just what was left on there. When that was dry, I took out Paint Couture's Bronze Luxe Metallic and I'm just going to be applying it to our little birds' beaks on both of them. Again, I'm not going for perfect here. I'm happy for it to look a little bit messy. And then I'm also going to be adding it just to a couple of the leaves around the top, not going for full coverage. I want it to look like perhaps at one point it did have gold gilding on there and it's worn away over time from being outside in the garden. After I finished applying it to the leaves, I then took out a wet wipe and pulled back some of the excess. When that was dry, I took out a clear wax and sealed the entire piece. When you're working with milk paint, you definitely want to use a wax as opposed to a clear coat because it can often be reactivated by water-based products, and I want to maintain that crackle and texture that we created, and the water-based paint can sometimes alter the look of this, so it's best to just use wax. I'm then using a microfiber cloth to pull back some of the excess and buff it out, and then I'm going to take out a dark wax and I'm really working it into the details of the faux bois castings and then wiping it back with that microfiber cloth, really allowing it to sit in the details. If it's a bit too dark, I just take out my clear wax brush again, go over the top of the dark wax, and then I also sometimes come in with a wet wipe that can also help pull back a little bit more. I'm going to be applying this brown wax to the entire piece. I don't want it too dark, but I do want it to have some age because again, I'm envisioning that this has been out in a garden for many, many years. It's got signs of aging, maybe some dirt. So the dark wax is definitely going to help achieve that and also highlight, as I said, the beautiful details of those molds. If this was perhaps a little bit too grungy for you, obviously you could leave this step out, or if you don't have wax and still want to achieve a similar result, you could use a glaze instead, or a brown paint wash could also work as well. Once I finished with the nest, I moved on to the birds, adding that wax, and I love how this is bringing out the details of those little bird statues, the feathers, their little faces, and again, wiped back the excess. And here's a look at our finished bird nest statue. I love how this turned out. I think it's amazing that the faux bois molds completely transformed what was just a plain terracotta pot. Let me know what you think of today's project in the comments. If you enjoyed today's video, I would really appreciate it if you would hit that like button, comment, and share it out. I really hope that you enjoyed this video collection, and you can find the products used in this video on our website, theprovincialfarmhouse.com.au. If you haven't already, I would love it if you would hit that subscribe button, like, comment, and share this out to a friend that you think might enjoy it.